Welcome back to my series on a history of feminism for gamers. This week we're looking at the mobilization of women in the workforce during World War II and how it informs us today. Unless you've been living under a rock, you're familiar with this image, Rosie the Riveter. This iconic 1942 poster by J. Howard Miller was adopted in the early 1980s by North American feminists as a symbol of empowerment and equal pay for equal work. But its original purpose was anti-strike propaganda. The history of feminism is full of ironies, but Rosie the Riveter's humble origins might be the movement's most ironic twist. Oops, wrong slide. Geraldine Hoff Doyle was working a temp job as a metal presser in an Inkster, Michigan defense factory when she was photographed by an unknown photographer and transformed into the "We Can Do It" poster image for the Westinghouse Electric Company, which didn't even employ riveters. The posters appeared for 2 weeks as Westinghouse Electric Company internal employee propaganda in an attempt to discourage absenteeism and cut down on strikes. Rosie was a general term to refer to female workers during World War II, who were often paid less than 60% of what male workers had earned for the same jobs before the war. Many women earned less than 50% of what men had. The shift to married women entering the workforce and women working in skilled trades was intended to be temporary. When the men came home, the women, for the most part, went back into the home. The Rosies weren't generally driven by a desire for equality. Instead, they were motivated by a nationalistic war effort and plain old necessity. Over half of the women who entered the workforce during World War II were employed by the defense industry. Not only were there fewer men around to do these jobs, but production requirements had increased. In a scenario that's repeated itself throughout history, women were only seen as capable of working when there weren't men around to do that work. But if the Rosie the Riveter image we know today wasn't widely circulated back then, what was the public face of Rosie the Riveter? That came thanks to Norman Rockwell and the May 29, 1943 cover of the Saturday Evening Post. Inspired by a recently released swing tune, Rockwell's Rosie was backgrounded by the American flag, posed like the prophet Isaiah in the Sistine Chapel, and immortalized eating a sandwich and stomping Hitler's Mein Kampf. I know, the obvious joke is, who made that sandwich? Another funny factoid about Rockwell's Rosie is that old Norman took some, we'll say, creative liberties with the likeness of his model, dental hygienist Mary Doyle. He beefed up her petite frame to the point that the model found her depiction shocking. The story goes that Rockwell phoned her post-publication to apologize. Decades before Photoshop, people. So why was the internal Westinghouse image reclaimed by the 1980s feminist movement and not Rockwell's much more widely circulated image of Rosie the Riveter? Copyright restrictions. So feminist symbol Rosie the Riveter started out as a propaganda campaign designed to reprogram what millions of women thought was normal, not for their own sake, but for the war effort. Once the war was over, normal went back to being the old normal, but 6 million women had discovered that they were, in fact, capable of caring for their children and working outside the home. A full 10% of the American workforce had shifted, and when that happens, it's very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. That's exactly what the powers that be tried to do, however. And this cognitive dissonance regarding what was normal or natural for women was one of the precursors for second-wave feminism. In a nutshell, you can't tell someone they're incapable of doing something, only to change your mind and insist they're very capable of doing something, only to then decide, no, you were right the first time, especially since these women discovered firsthand that they were, in fact, very good at these jobs. This fight continues to this day in the ideological battle surrounding the dreaded compensation gap. On one extreme, there are those who continue to quote the reductive 79-cent statistic, even though this is misleading. The wage gap varies wildly by profession, with female special education teachers making slightly more than male ones, while male janitors make significantly more than female ones. These variations lead wage gap deniers to claim that women self-select into professions that are more altruistic and lower paying, in line with women's more naturally nurturing instincts. Barf. This extreme insists that there's absolutely no gender discrimination in the workforce, and if there is, it's in favor of women, due to affirmative action policies that deny merit in favor of quotas. Both these extremes oversimplify a complex issue. It's important when discussing the wage gap or wage gaps to keep in mind that in the span of human history, only 2 to 3 generations of Western women have been taught that they are just as capable as men of doing not just some jobs, but most jobs. This impacts everything from a woman's confidence in negotiating a higher salary to how a woman with ambition is received by those around her when she does display that ambition. Women aren't just pressured by the workforce to sacrifice career for family commitments. There's still intense pressure on many women from their own families to put child rearing first, and many times the strongest guilt comes from a woman's own mother. Beyond that, the entire structure of many work-related events doesn't consider the ways a modern woman's view of the world differs from that of a modern man's. Let's take an example from video games, gaming's mecca E3. E3 is for many game professionals a must-attend event, but there are still gender-related barriers there that most people don't think about. I'm not talking about nitpicky things like t-shirts only being offered in men's styles and sizes. Those are relatively insignificant. More important is the fact that the shuttle service to E3 hotels doesn't reflect the reality of the conference. The big networking opportunities at E3 are the parties, and those tend to be held outside the convention center, at bars and restaurants in downtown Los Angeles. Those parties tend to start exactly when the shuttle service to the convention stops, 7 p.m. Transportation to and from those parties is usually not provided, leaving attendees to their own devices. To a man traveling alone, this doesn't tend to register as an issue. A man usually doesn't think twice about walking down a city street alone at night. A woman, on the other hand, has been trained through various street-proofing propaganda to dread precisely that scenario. Walking down the street at night is precisely the scenario where women are taught you might get raped. Unfortunately, this is precisely the situation that attendees to E3 are faced with to go to these important networking parties. So it begs the question, is it truly a woman's choice to avoid this scenario? Is this actually self-selecting out of potential networking opportunities? Or is this the result of profound social programming that removes a given woman's choices? It's very hard to make a choice that your social programming has taught you is reckless or will result in getting what's coming to you. It takes a lot more energy and bravery for a woman to engage in these situations as it would a man, and some days it really makes me want to shove those 52% pamphlets distributed at E3 straight up the ESA's tightly clenched butt. If 52% of gamers are women, assholes, why not structure your conference so we're not crapping our overpriced pants trying to network after hours? Is 2 hours of extra shuttle service that much to ask? That metro station near the Universal City Hotel block is on the boundary of a pretty sketchy neighborhood. And you try walking up that hill in heels. A savvy marketing company would recognize this unique reality for women in these situations at E3 and provide transportation for everyone past 7 p.m. Instead, the entire event is planned around the socialization and the normalized comfort of the male attendees. There are numerous examples where E3 sends messages like this to women that the conference is not for us. Every year there's a mirror takeover ad of Master Chief in the women's washroom we nickname the Pervy Chief ad because it basically looks like he's watching us wash our hands. In the men's room, it's just another guy. In the ladies' room, it takes on a very different connotation. One year, a Sunset Overdrive ad was even put on the mirror of my hotel room's washroom. Out of the corner of my eye when I got back to my room late at night, it looked like there was some punk dude standing in my bathroom. This isn't stuff most men usually think about, but this is stuff that women frequently think about. These are much more stressful situations than some silicone-enhanced booth babe handing out flyers for a game aimed at men. At least the booth babes gave me someone to talk to when the Manic Pixie Dream Girls with blue hair shunned me. I'm not making a judgment call here about whether this is objectively right or wrong. What I'm trying to show is the power of the different socialization that affects modern men and women due to conditioning that is very real that affects career decisions. Do you really want to enter a profession where you're always confronting fear? Rosie the Riveter, a retroactively adopted symbol of feminist pride, was part of that conditioning. Rosie was brazen wartime propaganda that very effectively changed the way that American women viewed themselves and their role in the world. It wasn't intended to change the working world forever, but it did. The lesson of Rosie the Riveter is that the things we collectively consider normal for men and women are heavily influenced by widespread social conditioning. Just because something is normal for women as a class doesn't mean it feels natural for a given woman as an individual, which begs the question, how many women are being stifled from following their professional aptitudes as individuals because their likes and dislikes are seen as weird? Yeah, guys, this is true for you too. And if I made a video about Major Dad, the metaphors would shift accordingly. Women who are passionate about video games fight this social programming every time we engage with the video game community. Rosie the Riveter has a lot in common with Ginny the Gamer. There's nothing inherent to games that should repel women, any more than there's something inherently anti-biological in a woman working an assembly line. What women like us defy is social norms. It's weird that we like violent entertainment. It's weird that we want to engage in power fantasy. It's weird that we'd rather focus on achievement-based values than compete on the grounds of how pretty, poised, or likable we are, the way we're supposed to. In a few decades, the idea that a, quote, normal woman won't naturally be interested in console video games will seem as strange to modern sentiments as a woman who feels like her natural place is in the home today. Modern stay-at-home moms really have to justify their decision, and I can't say that's right either. But only 60 years ago, less than one modern lifespan, stay-at-home moms were the norm. Which really makes you wonder how natural anything is, doesn't it? But why will this change in video games happen? Because the kids of today are much more likely to grow up with a video game console in their home. As more people embrace console and PC video games, more of their daughters will grow up without the unnatural psychological barrier that video games are for boys. The female artists, writers, and programmers of tomorrow will be much more likely to see video games as something that's as much for them as for their brothers, and that transition to equality is a direct descendant of the unintentionally powerful social change messaging that's embodied in Rosie the Riveter. Rosie's own journey is one from wartime propaganda to a symbol of workplace equality. Who knows how the inherent meaning of the current tropes versus women characters, Princess Peach, Lara Croft, Bayonetta, and Quiet from Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, will change with time.